Take me through what you are hearing on the ground from voters there in New Hampshire.
Well, thank you, Nicole. I am glad to be here. It's nice and rainy and miserable here in New Hampshire. I know you've been through this.
That doesn't keep anyone
before.
from the polls in that state.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
And it didn't keep people from standing in line yesterday for a Buttigieg event where we couldn't even get in. The fire marshal shut it down. And folks in line there were interested in kicking the tires of Pete Buttigieg. You know, the Iowa thing is still a mess, and we are still going back and forth about who the real quote-unquote winner was. But New Hampshire voters here don't need to wait on Iowa to certify the results. They pretty much get what happened there. Bernie and Buttigieg were the big winners, Joe Biden the big loser. And while there's some talk about Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren is just not as much a topic of discussion as she was not that long ago when there was the talk that she was going to sweep both Iowa and New Hampshire and go right on to Nevada.
You know, I take your warning about political predictions seriously, but there is something that those of us who have been crossing paths in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina and all these places for years notice, and it's the timing of the peak. I mean, can you just it would appear to me that the timing of his peak appeal may coincide with Iowa and New Hampshire in a way that gives him new life in South Carolina. The timing of Warren's peak may hurt her in those same contests. And I want your thoughts on that. And then a two-part question. It's my sense that if Buttigieg had a clear victory in Iowa, even by 1/10 of 1 percentage point, and that had been known at 10 p.m., that would have been as big of a political bombshell as then Senator Obama's victory in Iowa many years earlier. Do you agree with that?
Okay, maybe I'll start with that one, which is I do think it's still sort of hit as, if not a bombshell, it had a big impact up here. People are talking about Pete Buttigieg in a way that they probably weren't talking about him the week before the caucuses. And in fact, when you were going in and when I was in Iowa in those last couple of days, the real talk was about maybe Warren sneaking into second place, right? And that it was going to be a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and somewhere in that mix were going to be Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg. The fact is, Pete Buttigieg really did well by closing the deal in and around the suburbs, the places where Democrats won the House in 2018. New Hampshire, as you well know, is much of it, where we're sitting right now, for example, southern New Hampshire, is basically just a big suburb or exurb of Boston. These are the kinds of voters who love a candidate who fits the profile of Pete Buttigieg. But it still doesn't answer some really nagging questions about whether he can perform well outside of these places. And we haven't had any polling out of Nevada, so we don't know if he got a bump in a state like that or South Carolina from his success here in New Hampshire. The other thing that's interesting is the number of voters I've talked to who raised the name of Mike Bloomberg without any provocation. One voter I was talking to, standing out in line in the pouring rain and sleet, said, I'm here because I think what folks are recognizing up here is there's a Bernie lane and there's a not Bernie lane. And he says, I want someone in the not Bernie lane. I can't decide who it is. He said, maybe Amy, maybe Mayor Pete, maybe Mike Bloomberg. The name Biden didn't really come up. He's a lot of folks up here talking about his age and his poor performance. So Biden's poor performance has had as big of an impact on voters here in New Hampshire as Buttigieg's success.
So you're so good. I think you answered part one, too. Jason Johnson, next time I'm going to put your face on camera, even because you said more with your expressions and sort of places where you agreed with Amy. Go ahead on all of it.
Yeah, so here's the thing, and this is kind of what I had been tweeting about earlier, Nicole. I predicted this a couple of weeks ago. I have been hearing people, and in particular in the African-American community, talking about Mike Bloomberg. And I want to sort of say where this is coming from. If you go from Martin Luther King holiday all the way through Black History Month, I have friends and colleagues and sources. People are traveling around the country. They're doing Black History Month programs. They're giving speeches. They're talking to people in Memphis and Florida and Texas and everything else like that. And the story that I am hearing, and it's not just from older people, is if Joe Biden falls, if he stumbles, black voters are desperate to get Donald Trump out of office. That is the number one driving force. And many of them are saying, I will support Mike Bloomberg, even with his problematic stop and frisk, even with his gentrification, because they want to see Trump out of there. And I don't think that Mayor Pete or Bernie Sanders have managed to convince anybody that they can win a general election. And if you can't carry the African-American base, you're not winning this election. And I don't think either of them have sold that story yet.
Brad?
I think that I'm hearing everywhere I go, and I do 3 or 4 cities a week with National Action Network, and on my daily radio show, surprisingly, people bringing up Michael Bloomberg without it even being the discussion. Yep. And I was one that helped lead the anti-stop and frisk move. So it's not like they think they're telling me something that I would agree with. I'm beginning to hear that. I think he being Bloomberg, immensely helped himself in going towards South Carolina after next Tuesday with the Obama ads. He has an ad out that has Barack Obama praising his leadership on fighting guns. So he's running an important campaign, but also something I think helped him was the debacle in Iowa made people say, well, this guy at least is a technocrat and will get stuff to work and operate right. So it inadvertently helped him. He wasn't in the race, and people say his company could have run the caucus better in Iowa. I think that you've got to watch him because we're starting to hear that in places we shouldn't. And you've got to watch Buttigieg. If people just go back to 16, Bernie Sanders flew to New York and had breakfast with me in Harlem the day after he won New Hampshire. If he had, by any count, a 1/10 of 1% been ahead of Hillary, he would not be saying what he's saying today. So let's give Buttigieg credit. However this ends up, he's ending up where no one thought that he was going to end up, because the last few days the polls were saying that Elizabeth Warren was surging and he was going down, and that did not happen no matter what the final tally is.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.